The attack dog dropped to one knee. That was the part nobody could explain afterward. Not the security guards, not the charge nurse at the station, not the orderly who had been mopping the same patch of floor for 20 minutes. The animal, a Belgian Malinois with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, simply stopped mid-stride in the middle of the Harlow General Hospital corridor and lowered his front end to the ground in a full military kneel. Right beside the wheelchair, right beside the nurse everyone called a burden. Olivia Marsh sat very still. Her hands, resting in her lap, had gone white at the knuckles. Because she had already seen the men at the entrance, 3 of them, in hospital-issued lanyards that didn't match any department she recognized, with eyes that moved the wrong way, not like visitors searching for a room number, like operators clearing a building. The dog whined once, low and urgent, and Olivia understood exactly what that sound meant. If this story already has you gripping your seat, you're in the right place. Follow along until the very end, and if it moves you, hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Harlow General Hospital sat at the northern edge of Callaway, a mid-sized city that had the particular quality of places trying hard to look like somewhere else. The building was 14 stories of poured concrete and tinted glass, the kind of structure that photographs well for city brochures and functions adequately for everyone inside it, which is to say, the elevators were unreliable, the break rooms were perpetually out of coffee, and the internal politics ran on the same fuel as every hospital everywhere. Exhaustion, ego, and the constant quiet competition for resources that nobody admitted was happening. Olivia had been working there for 7 months. She had not had a good 7 months. The wheelchair was the first thing people noticed, and the problem with being the first thing people notice is that it tends to become the only thing. Before the wheelchair, before whatever had happened to her 17 months ago that left her with nerve damage in both legs and a medical file she apparently wasn't allowed to read in full, Olivia Marsh had been a different kind of person in a different kind of life. But that life was classified, technically speaking, and classified things have a way of staying buried until they don't. What the staff at Harlow General knew, she was 32, she had a nursing degree from a state university, she had experience in emergency trauma care, and she used a wheelchair most of the time and a cane occasionally, depending on what the day was doing to her body. What the staff at Harlow General had decided, she was taking up space that someone more capable should occupy. She was a liability in a fast-moving unit, and someone in administration had made a soft-hearted hiring decision that the rest of them were now obligated to work around. This was not stated directly. It never is. It was communicated through the assignments she received, the tasks that required no mobility, no initiative, no particular skill. Updating intake charts that a medical assistant could handle. Restocking supply cabinets on the day shift when the unit was quiet and her presence inconvenienced nobody. Being excluded from briefings on the grounds that she could review the notes later, which she always did, and which nobody ever asked her about. Dr. Randall Pruitt, the senior attending for the medical surgical floor, had said it plainly enough to a colleague in the hallway 3 weeks into her employment, apparently not aware, or not caring, that Olivia was in the supply room 6 feet away with the door ajar. "She's a warm body filling a slot," Pruitt had said. "Let her do her paperwork and stay out of the way." Olivia had finished counting the IV bags and said nothing. This was a skill she had learned before nursing school, before any of the things that came after nursing school, in training environments where silence was sometimes the only accurate response to a situation. She was good at it. She was, in fact, extraordinarily good at assessing what a room required from her and providing exactly that and nothing more. What she had not been able to fully suppress was the part of her that noticed everything. She noticed, for example, that Dr. Pruitt ordered unnecessary imaging on patients whose insurance would cover it and skipped it for patients whose wouldn't. She noticed that the pharmacy discrepancy logs had gaps that didn't match the volumes being moved. She noticed that certain patient files were being accessed remotely after hours by a login credential that belonged to a hospitalist who had been on leave for 3 weeks. She kept these observations the way she kept most things, quietly, internally, documented in a notebook she kept in the inner pocket of her bag, written in a shorthand that looked like nothing in particular to anyone who might flip through it by accident. She was not ready to do anything with them yet. She was, she kept reminding herself, just a nurse doing paperwork. That was the story. That was what had to remain the story for as long as she needed it to. The problem was that something had changed in the last 9 days. Oh, it started with a car, a gray sedan, no plates, parked across from the hospital's staff entrance on a Tuesday morning when she arrived at 6:45. She noted it. It was gone by 8. She noted that too. The following Thursday, a different car, black, with plates that, when she ran them in a way she absolutely was not supposed to still have the access to run them, returned a rental agency in a city 400 miles away that had reported those plates stolen 11 months ago. She started varying her routes from the parking structure to the building entrance. She stopped taking the same elevator twice in a row. She began arriving through the emergency bay instead of the main doors, which required a longer push across the access road and aggravated her left hip, but which gave her a different line of sight. She said nothing to anyone about any of this. What she told herself, she was being careful. What she suspected but did not let herself fully form into a complete thought. They had found her. It had taken them 17 months, but they had found her, and now she had to decide very quickly what to do about that. The morning everything broke open started like every other morning. She clocked in at 6:52. She poured the remains of the break room coffee into a cup without examining it too closely. She reviewed the overnight intake notes for the 4 patients she'd been assigned to track, none of whom had any acute changes. She was midway through updating the 3rd chart when Danny Reyes, one of the newer nurses on the floor, dropped a stack of folders on the counter beside her and said, "Pruitt wants the discharge paperwork for bed 7 done before 8. He told me to tell you." Olivia looked up. "He could have told me himself. I'm right here." Danny had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I know. He asked me to pass it along." "Okay." Olivia took the folders. "Tell him it'll be ready." She watched Danny walk away and thought, this is the part where a person with more dignity than sense would say something. Make a formal complaint, request a meeting with the nursing director. She had calculated with some precision that doing any of those things would draw exactly the kind of attention she could not afford. So instead, she finished the chart she was on, started on bed 7's discharge papers, and positioned her chair so she had a clear view of the hallway, the nurse's station, and the elevator bank simultaneously. At 7:41, the dog walked in. But, he came through the main corridor from the direction of the lobby, which meant he'd passed through the public entrance and the reception area without anyone stopping him, which was itself remarkable. He was on a leash held by a man in his late 30s or early 40s. It was hard to say. He was one of those people whose age lived in his eyes more than his face. The man was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans and a gray jacket, but he moved like someone who had spent a significant portion of his life being responsible for what happened in the rooms he entered. His eyes did the same sweep Olivia's did when she arrived somewhere new. Exits, sightlines, anomalies. The dog was the scarred Belgian Malinois she would come to know as Rex, though she didn't know that yet. What she knew immediately, without having to think about it, was that the animal had a working dog gait, that specific quality of attention and forward motion that distinguish trained military or law enforcement animals from civilian pets. She had been around enough of them in a previous life to recognize it the way you recognize an accent. The man stopped at the nurse's station. The nurse on duty, Callum Voss, looked up with the particular expression of someone who is about to cite a policy about animals in medical facilities. "Registered therapy animal," the man said, before Carla could begin. He produced a card from his jacket pocket. "I have a veteran patient contact here for a 9 o'clock appointment with Dr. Emmett in Neuro. Marcus Webb, room 414. Carla checked the system. Whatever she found there satisfied her enough to wave him through. The man and the dog moved down the corridor. And then, at the precise intersection of the main hall and the side passage that led to the supply corridor, the dog stopped. He turned his head toward Olivia. Then he lowered himself into the military kneel that nobody in that hallway had any framework for understanding. Olivia sat completely still and looked at the animal and understood, with the particular cold clarity that comes from training rather than emotion, that Rex had done this because he recognized something about her. Not her face, her bearing. The specific quality of how she held herself in a world that didn't know what she actually was. She looked up at his handler. The man was watching her with the same quality of attention. "Sorry about that," he said. in a tone that communicated he was not particularly sorry. "He doesn't usually do that." "It's fine," Olivia said. A beat. "You were a medic," the man said. It wasn't entirely a question. Olivia's hands were still white at the knuckles. "I'm a nurse." "Right." He didn't push it. He said, "I'm Callum Voss. I'm visiting a patient on 4. He paused. "I was special operations, 12 years. She looked at him for a moment. "Olivia Marsh." "I know," Callum said. That was when she saw the men at the entrance. 3 of them. Hospital lanyards, like she'd noted earlier, but she could see now with Callum standing close enough that she could read the slight shift in his posture that he had clocked them too. His right hand had moved to a position near his hip that was habitual rather than deliberate. "Don't look directly," she said quietly. "The one in the blue scrubs near the door hasn't looked at a single patient or staff member since he walked in. He's tracking foot traffic." Callum's expression didn't change. "The other 2 are staged at the secondary entrance. I saw them when I came through the lobby." A pause. "Do you know who they are?" "I have a strong working hypothesis," Olivia said. "That's a careful answer." "I'm a careful person." Rex was still at her side. The dog had risen back to his feet but stayed close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. She kept her hands in her lap and her face neutral, and her eyes moving through the reflections in the glass partition across the hall, tracking the man in the blue scrubs the way she'd been taught to track a target, peripherally, patiently, without committing to a stare that could be felt. "The charge nurse at the main station," Callum said. "Her badge says Voss, no relation. Has she been here all morning?" Olivia had already run through this. "She came on at 6. She's not involved. The one to be cautious about is the shift coordinator, Brennan. He's been on his phone more than normal, and he's been positioning himself near the stairwell access." She paused. "Which is either a coincidence or it isn't." Callum was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known they were watching you?" 9 days, she said. "Possibly longer if they were better at it earlier." "Are you armed?" "I'm a nurse in a hospital," she said. "That wasn't what I asked." She looked at him directly then, for the first time. "No, I came here to disappear, not to start something." "Okay," he said. "Then we need to move. Not obviously. I need to get to 414 first. Webb is a real patient and he's actually expecting me. But after that, you don't need to involve yourself in this," Olivia said. Not warmly, not harshly, the way you state a fact. "Rex made a choice," Callum said. "I tend to honor his choices. He's been right more often than I have." He glanced at the dog, then back at her. "And you already know too much for it to be safe for me to walk away." She considered that for a moment. She was tired, a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the weight of maintaining a version of yourself that doesn't match what's underneath. 7 months of paperwork and condescension and careful silence. 17 months of a life that didn't fit. 32 years of being, when it was useful to be, the person in the room that no one watched. 4th floor, she said. "I have a reason to be up there anyway. Supply delivery for the neuro ward." "Give me 20 minutes with Webb," Callum said. "You'll have 15, Olivia said. "The one in blue scrubs is going to move sooner than that." She was right about the timing. She was 14 minutes into her supply run, moving through the 4th floor corridor at the pace of someone who belonged there absolutely, when she heard the stairwell door open behind her and knew without turning around that it wasn't a staff member. The footsteps were wrong, too measured, too aware of themselves. She turned the corner into the neuro ward's supply alcove and stopped, angling herself so the supply cart was between her and the corridor, her hands busy with a clipboard she'd picked up from the nursing station. She heard the footsteps slow, heard them stop. Heard the radio click twice, low and fast, a comms signal. Her jaw tightened. She had 43 seconds, give or take, before whoever was at the end of that radio signal got a response and made a decision about moving. She used the time to finish writing a note on the clipboard that would make complete sense to anyone who found it later, something about IV solution inventory that was entirely accurate and entirely beside the point. Then Callum came through the ward door from the opposite direction, Rex at his heel. He took in the situation in approximately 1 second and said, to the middle distance, There are two of them on this floor now. The third one stayed at the entrance. How's Mr. Webb? Olivia asked in a normal voice. He'll be fine. A beat. The stairwell behind you. I know. There's also one by the elevator bank who just stopped pretending to read a pamphlet about cardiac health. I counted him, she said. Rex pressed gently against her wheel, not quite leaning, just present. She found to her faint surprise that she found this helpful. Olivia. Callum's voice was quiet, stripped of everything except necessity. I need you to tell me what we're actually dealing with. Not because I'm curious, because the decisions I make in the next few minutes depend on it. She looked at the far wall for a moment. Then she said, 17 months ago, I was a medical intelligence officer with a specialized unit attached to a defense contractor program. We were embedded in veteran rehabilitation facilities. The official mandate was developing recovery protocols for service members with traumatic neurological injuries. She paused. The actual mandate was something else. Callum said nothing. He waited. The program was running unauthorized experimental treatment on active duty soldiers and veteran patients, without informed consent. Some of them didn't know what was being done to them. Some of them were told it was standard rehabilitation. Her voice stayed flat. I compiled documentation, internally flagged it through 3 separate channels. The response was to have my security clearance revoked, my service record altered to indicate psychological instability, and my contract terminated. Another pause. I was also in a vehicle accident 2 weeks after I filed the 3rd report. The investigation concluded it was a road condition incident. But you don't think it was, Callum said. I know it wasn't, she said. The nerve damage in my legs is consistent with what happens when a vehicle is deliberately run off a road at speed, which I confirmed later when I had access to the right medical literature and enough time to read it carefully. Callum absorbed this. And the documentation you compiled? Encrypted and stored, she said. Not here. Not physically accessible to anyone who finds me today. But they don't know that. They don't know what I have or where it is, she said, which is why they haven't simply resolved the situation through other means. They need me to tell them first. The stairwell door opened. The man who came through it was wearing blue scrubs and a lanyard that said Environmental Services. And he had the particular quality of someone who is pretending to be uninteresting while being in fact the most interested person in the room. He stopped when he saw them. His eyes went to Olivia, then to Callum, then to Rex, then back to Olivia. Miss Marsh, he said, Dr. Brennan would like a word. Callum said, very calmly, Dr. Brennan isn't on this ward. The man's attention shifted. This doesn't involve you. I'm visiting a patient, Callum said. Rex is a registered therapy animal. We're both exactly where we're supposed to be. A beat. The man's hand moved slightly toward his hip. Rex made a sound. Not a bark. Something quieter, more precise. A sound that communicated information about the current situation with efficiency that Olivia found almost admirable. The man's hand stopped moving. Miss Marsh, he said again, it would be better for everyone if you came with me voluntarily. Olivia looked at him. She had the quality of stillness that comes not from patience, but from the absence of uncertainty. She had already decided what she was going to do. She was simply waiting for the right moment to do it. Tell me something, she said. The sedative you're planning to use, is it propofol or something more exotic? I'm asking because if it's something more exotic, it means Dr. Hargrove is still involved, and I have specific documentation on Dr. Hargrove that I'd like to know is still relevant. The name landed. She watched it land. The man's composure didn't break entirely, but it moved, a micro-expression, there and gone, that confirmed everything she needed to confirm. So Dr. Hargrove is still running the program, she said quietly. More to herself than to anyone else. Callum had positioned himself between Olivia and the stairwell door without making it look deliberate. Rex had shifted his weight forward in the specific way that working dogs shift when a situation is about to require them. The man in the blue scrubs made a decision. He reached for the radio on his belt, and the hospital-wide PA system clicked on. Code Gray, 4th floor. All security personnel, 4th floor. Not called by anyone in that alcove. Called from somewhere else, which meant someone had seen something on a camera, or heard something through a different channel, and now the entire response architecture of the building was activating. "We need to move," Callum said. "I'm aware," Olivia said. She was already turning her chair toward the far end of the corridor, toward the secondary stairwell that she had identified and filed away on her second week at Harlow General for no particular reason, except that she identified and filed away secondary exits the way other people breathed. Rex fell in beside her. The man in the blue scrubs took 2 steps after them, and then Rex turned and looked at him, and the man stopped. Sometimes that's all it takes. The secondary stairwell was accessible, barely. There was a lift mechanism for the wheelchair that functioned on a good day, and this was, incrementally, not quite a good day, but it worked on the 3rd attempt and deposited her on the 3rd-floor landing with a mechanical clunk that echoed up the shaft. Callum came through the door behind her 30 seconds later, Rex moving like a shadow. "There are more of them than I initially assessed," Callum said. "I counted at least 2 more in the lobby when I looked at the camera feed at the nursing station on 4. Whoever is running this operation committed significant resources." "They've been building to this for 9 days," Olivia said. "They were establishing surveillance patterns before moving to extraction." "Extraction," Callum said. The word came out with a specific neutrality that communicated he understood exactly what it meant in this context. "That's the polite word for it," she said. They were moving through the 3rd-floor corridor now. Radiology and imaging, quieter than the floors above, the morning's scheduled scans not yet underway. The lights were fluorescent and slightly uneven, one fixture near the MRI suite flickering in a way that probably violated several maintenance protocols. "You said the documentation isn't physically here," Callum said. "It's not. But you have a way to access it." She looked at him sideways. He was watching the corridor ahead. "I might," she said. "If we get to a secure workstation with external network access," he said, "and if you have what I think you have, there are people I can reach who would move on this quickly. People who've been looking for a thread to pull on this kind of program for a long time." "I don't know you," Olivia said. "No," he agreed. "But Rex knows you, and I know Rex." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were steady on the wheels. Her left hip was protesting the activity more than she was going to acknowledge out loud, and the morning had already asked more of her than the morning was supposed to ask, and somewhere below them, the people who had turned her into a different person 7 months ago were coordinating a response to her continued existence. "There's an administrative workstation in the Imaging Center Coordinator's office," she said. "It has external network access. The coordinator, Patterson, doesn't come in until 9:15 on Tuesdays." "It's 8:52, Callum said. "I know," she said. "We have 23 minutes." They turned toward the imaging center. Rex pressed close to her wheel, steady and certain, as though he had always known this was where he was supposed to be, beside this woman. In this corridor, on this particular Tuesday morning when everything that had been dormant for 17 months was finally, irrevocably waking up. Behind them, on the 4th floor, boots hit the linoleum at a pace that was no longer pretending to be anything other than what it was. And in the coordinator's office at the end of the imaging center hallway, a workstation sat dark and waiting. And on a server 3 states away, behind 17 layers of encryption and a dead man switch that had been patiently counting down for 7 months, a file was ready to move the moment someone entered the right sequence of characters. Olivia Marsh had spent 17 months being invisible. She was about to become very loud. The coordinator's office door was locked, which she had anticipated, and the lock was a standard hospital-grade tumbler, which she had also anticipated, and the small flat tool she kept in the inner lining of her bag was something she had not needed in 7 months and had kept anyway, because some habits are not about optimism or pessimism, but simply about accuracy. 14 seconds. She'd been faster once. The hip made certain positions harder than they used to be, and the angle was wrong for a wheelchair approach, and Callum stood in the doorway watching the corridor with his back to her, while Rex sat close enough that she could hear the dog's steady breathing, and she focused on the lock and not on the sound of boots somewhere above them that had not gotten quieter. The door opened. She went in first. Callum followed, pulling the door closed behind them without letting the latch click too hard. The office was small. A desk, a monitor, a filing cabinet, a wall calendar showing the wrong month because nobody had flipped it. The workstation was locked to the coordinator's credentials, which was the first actual obstacle, because she hadn't worked in imaging and didn't have Patterson's login. "Can you get in?" Callum asked. "Give me a minute." "We have less than 20. "Then stop talking," she said. He did. She wasn't a hacker. That word belonged to a different category of person with a different category of training. What she was, more precisely, was someone who understood how institutional systems were built and therefore understood where they were weak. Hospital networks were built by procurement committees making decisions about cost and compliance, and almost never about actual security, which meant the gaps were predictable once you knew what to look for. She found the gap in 4 minutes. A remote access portal for IT maintenance tucked into the system preferences, still carrying the default credential set from the network's last infrastructure update. She had noticed the software version number on her second day at Harlow General and written it in her notebook next to a supply inventory list because it was the kind of detail that was useless right up until the moment it wasn't. The desktop opened. She pulled her phone from her bag, a secondary device, prepaid, purchased in cash from a gas station outside Callaway 8 months ago, and opened a browser that routed through 3 different relay points before landing on an address that looked like a defunct academic research archive. She typed a sequence of characters that she had not written down anywhere. The page returned a single prompt field. She typed the passphrase. "How long?" Callum asked from the door. "Depends on the connection speed." She watched the progress bar. "The files are partitioned. They won't transfer as a single packet. They'll come through in sequence, and I need to verify each segment before it moves to the next." "What exactly are we transferring?" "Everything," she said. "Intake records, experimental protocol documentation, consent form analysis. Specifically the analysis showing the consent forms were constructed to be unintelligible to patients with the exact neurological profiles being recruited. Financial records showing the money flow between the contractor and the oversight committee. And approximately 400 pages of clinical observation notes that should not exist under any ethical framework for human research." Callum was quiet for a moment. "How long were you inside the program before you figured out what it was?" 6 weeks before I was certain. 4 weeks before I was suspicious enough to start documenting." She paused. 2 days after I was certain, I filed the first internal report. That was my mistake. Not the documenting, Dico. The internal report. I thought I was inside a system that could correct itself. "Most people think that," Callum said. "Most people haven't had clearance to see how the correction mechanisms actually work," she said flatly. "I should have known better." The first segment completed. She verified the checksum, approved the next segment's transfer, and checked the time. 16 minutes remaining. She was doing the calculation. Transfer time, available minutes, margin of error. When Rex, who had been quiet at her side, made a sound. Short, directional, pointed at the wall to their left. Both she and Callum went still. Footsteps in the corridor. One set, moving slowly. She watched Callum's right hand and watched him make the decision not to reach for whatever he was carrying. Smart, not yet. The footsteps slowed outside the door, paused, continued. She released a breath through her nose, silent and controlled, and went back to the monitor. "He's going to double back," Callum said quietly. "I know. We have maybe 8 minutes before this position is compromised. I need 12. "Olivia." "I know," she said again, sharper this time, because she did know. She was doing the math in real time, the same as him, and arriving at the same unsatisfying answer. The transfer was at 31%. The corridor outside had one person who would double back and possibly 2 more incoming depending on what floor coordination looked like. The exit from the imaging center had 2 options. The main corridor back toward the elevators, which was compromised, or the maintenance access that ran along the building's east wall, which she had identified on a facilities map 3 months ago for no particular reason at the time. "There's a maintenance corridor," she said. "East wall, access panel at the far end of the imaging suite. It runs to a service elevator that exits at the loading dock on the ground floor." Callum looked at her. "The wheelchair doesn't fit through the access panel," she said before he could ask. "The passage is approximately 22 inches wide. Standard maintenance clearance." A beat. "So we carry you," Callum said, in the tone of someone solving a logistics problem. "Nobody carries me," she said, with a particular quality of flatness that closed that conversation. Another beat. "The maintenance corridor gets us to the loading dock," he said, "but not with you mobile on the other end. There's a transport cart in the loading area. I've seen it through the dock window from the exterior access road. Medical supply delivery uses it. It has wheels." She paused. "It's not a chair." "But it gets you moving." "It gets me moving." She checked the transfer. 44%. The footsteps came back down the corridor, slower this time, deliberate, the kind of slow that is looking for something. The door handle moved. Not turned, moved just enough to test whether it was latched. A professional check. Whoever was on the other side knew enough to test before committing. Callum crossed the room in 3 steps and put his hand flat against the door, pressure applied at the frame point to reinforce the latch mechanism. Rex, who had been sitting, rose without a sound. The handle returned to neutral. 7 seconds. Then footsteps moved away. Not retreating, repositioning. Whoever it was had noted the resistance in the door and was making a different calculation. "He's going to call it in," Callum said. 60 seconds, Olivia said. The transfer bar read 61%. "We don't have 60 seconds. 58% of this file is not enough," she said. "The financial records are in the final segment. Without them, it's clinical documentation with no institutional connection. It doesn't close the loop." Callum looked at her across the small room. This woman, in a wheelchair, in a borrowed office, in a hospital where nobody had thought she was worth watching, holding the last 17 months of her life in a progress bar on a stolen login, and made a decision. "Tell me what I'm listening for," he said, and moved back to the door. "Radio click patterns," she said. 2 short clicks is a position check, 3 is a move order. He positioned himself at the door again, one hand on the frame, head tilted. She watched the transfer bar. 68%, 71. Outside, somewhere farther down the corridor, she heard a door open. Different footsteps, 2 pairs this time, moving together, 77%. 3 clicks, Callum said quietly. "How far?" "Near end of the corridor, 30 seconds. 83. "Rex," Callum said, very low. The dog moved to the center of the room and faced the door. 89. The footsteps were close enough that she could hear the specific weight of them. 2 people, one heavier than the other, both moving with the particular economy of people who did this kind of thing regularly. 94. The door handle turned. Callum held the frame pressure. The handle turned harder. 97. A voice outside, contained and cold. "Open the door." 98. "Hospital security," the voice said. "We have reports of unauthorized." 99. The progress bar completed. 100. "Done," Olivia said, and pulled the flash drive from the port, and then she looked at Callum and said, "Let them in." He looked back at her. "Let them in," she repeated. "They're going to break it down in about 15 seconds anyway, and I'd rather control when the door opens than explain a broken frame." Callum removed his hand from the door. It opened. 2 men. The heavier one in front, mid-40s, the kind of build that came from structured training rather than natural size, with a jaw that was slightly too set for someone who was actually hospital security. The second man was younger, watching Callum with the specific quality of attention that was about threat assessment rather than curiosity. Rex held the center of the room and did not move. "Ms. Marsh," the first man said. His eyes went to the monitor, which Olivia had already returned to its lock screen. "We're going to need you to come with us." "On whose authority?" she asked. "Hospital administration." "I'd like to see that in writing," she said. "Given that I'm a staff member and this is a staff access area, and I have no record of any administrative instruction requiring me to be—" "Ma'am," a different quality in his voice now, stripped of the pretense. "This isn't a conversation." "No?" Olivia agreed. "It isn't." And then she looked at Callum, and Callum looked at Rex, and Rex moved. Not toward the men, toward the far wall, toward the door that led from the coordinator's office into the imaging suite itself. He hit it with his shoulder at the exact height of the handle, which was either trained behavior or the result of being a very large dog with a clear sense of purpose, and the door swung open into the darkened suite beyond. Callum moved through the door and Olivia followed, and the man in front took 2 steps after them before Rex turned in the doorway and the man stopped. Rex had a specific way of stopping people. It wasn't aggression exactly. It was more like clarity, an absolute absence of ambiguity about the current situation and what would happen if it developed in a particular direction. The man understood this. The second man had a radio out. She could hear him calling it in as they moved through the imaging suite. The large MRI unit, dark and silent, the ultrasound bays curtained, the fluorescent safety lights casting everything in a flat, institutional blue. The access panel was at the far end, behind a rack of storage shelves that took her another 40 seconds to navigate around because the passage was built for people who walked, and the shelves were exactly the wrong configuration, and she caught her left wheel on the rack's corner brace and had to reverse and try again while Callum held the panel open and didn't say anything about the time they didn't have. She got through. The maintenance corridor was exactly as she'd calculated, narrow, utilitarian, smelling of machine oil and the particular staleness of air that circulates only when a system needs servicing. The walls were close. She could push herself through, both hands working, though the resistance from a small concrete ridge in the floor cost her another 6 seconds on a schedule that had no seconds left to give. Rex threaded through behind her. Callum pulled the panel closed. Darkness. Briefly. Then her eyes adjusted to the emergency strip lighting running along the baseboard. Enough to navigate. She moved. The radio transmission went through, Callum said. They know we're in the east section. How many exits does this corridor have that they can reach before the loading dock? 1, he said. The maintenance junction about halfway through. If they know the building layout, they'll have someone there in 4 minutes, she said. We need 3.5. They moved. What? The maintenance junction was a T-intersection where the east corridor met the building's central mechanical spine. When they reached it, the junction was empty. 1 minute 12 seconds ahead of her estimate, which should have felt like a win, but felt, more accurately, like a narrower margin than she liked, because the estimate had assumed they didn't know the building layout, and she was no longer certain that was true. She stopped at the junction, listened. From the right branch, straight the direction that led back toward the main building systems, she could hear something. Not footsteps. Ventilation. The normal industrial hum of a hospital's mechanical floor. She went left. 30 more meters of corridor, a slight downward slope where the building's foundation grade changed, a set of double doors with a push bar. And then the loading dock, and the cold morning air coming in through the open bay, and a medical supply cart exactly where she'd said it would be, parked beside a pallet of sterile packaging that hadn't been processed yet. The cart was metal, hip-height, 4 swivel wheels, designed for transporting box supplies from delivery vehicles to the service elevator. Absolutely not designed for a person. She looked at it for approximately 1 second, making the calculation, and then she transferred herself from the wheelchair to the cart's lower shelf in a movement that was graceless and not painless, and left her hips screaming, and she gripped the cart's side rail, and she looked at Callum. Service elevator, she said. He left the wheelchair, no choice, it wouldn't fit the access angles, and moved to the cart and pushed. Rex ran alongside. The service elevator was around the corner, bay-style doors that opened wide enough for supply pallets. Callum hit the call button and the elevator arrived in 22 seconds, and they were inside and the doors were closing when she heard the loading dock doors open behind them. She didn't look back. The elevator moved. "Where are we going?" Callum asked. "Basement," she said. "Network infrastructure for the hospital's main systems is in the basement. There's an IT operations room with a dedicated line that isn't routed through the main hospital network." He looked at her. "When they lock down the building network," she said, "and they will lock down the building network, the transfer I just completed will have gone out through that line. But there's a second step." She held up the flash drive. "This is the local backup. I need to reach someone specific with it before they find us, because the remote transfer will not reach the right people without a person on the other end to authenticate it." "Who do you need to reach?" She hesitated. This was the part she hadn't figured out entirely. The contact she'd planned for, the person she'd built the dead man's switch around, the one individual she trusted enough to hold the authentication key on the other end, was a retired federal investigator named Marcus Truell, who had been looking at defense contractor irregularities for 3 years before he'd quietly, officially retired 18 months ago. She had reached him once, briefly, 4 months after the accident, through an intermediary she no longer had access to. She had not had direct contact since. "I need a secure line to reach someone outside this building," she said, "without using anything that can be backtracked in the next 20 minutes. Callum was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The patient I came to see, Marcus Webb." She looked at him. "He's a retired federal investigator," Callum said. "He came to Calloway 6 weeks ago. He's been here under a different name because he got made at his last location and needed to move." A pause. "He and I have been in contact for 14 months. He's the reason Rex and I are in this city." The elevator stopped at the basement level. Olivia did not move immediately. She was processing what he had just told her, not the surface information, but the underlying architecture of it, the timeline, the sequence. A retired federal investigator relocating to Calloway 6 weeks ago. Callum Voss arriving at Harlow General with a registered therapy animal for a 9 o'clock appointment with a patient in neurology. The specific floor where Marcus Webb was housed. "You came here for me," she said. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was more precise than that. Callum met her eyes. "Webb found a thread 8 months ago. It led to Calloway. It led to a former military medical intelligence officer with altered records who was working as a nurse under a simplified identity." He paused. "We've been watching to see if they found you before we could make contact. And today you realized they had. Today Rex made a choice," he said. "And I followed it." She looked at the dog. Rex looked back at her with the particular quality of patience that working dogs develop. Not the comfortable patience of an animal at rest, but the active patience of an animal that is ready and has been waiting for as long as necessary. "Room 414, she said. "Yes." "Your patient Marcus Webb is not named Marcus Webb. His name is Marcus Truell," Callum said. The air in the elevator felt different. 17 months. 3 reports that went nowhere. An accident that wasn't an accident. 7 months of supply inventory and paperwork, and being told she was taking up space. And somewhere in room 414, through all of it, the person she had spent a year and a half trying to find a way to reach had been 42 miles away under a different name, waiting for exactly the same moment she was. She gripped the cart railing. "We need to get back to 4, she said. "The stairwells are compromised." "I know." She thought for 3 seconds. "The service elevator goes to 4, but they'll expect that." "There's another option," Callum said, "but you're not going to like it. Tell me anyway." "The external fire stair on the building's south face. It's accessible from the loading dock level. It's open, fire egress, so it can't be locked from outside. Gets to the 4th floor landing directly." "It's outside," she said. "Yes." "In June." "It's 62 degrees, he said. "I'm on a supply cart," she said. "I know." She exhaled through her nose. Her hip was a sustained complaint at this point, not sharp enough to be an emergency, but persistent enough to be a real factor in everything she was trying to do. And the cart's lower shelf was pressed steel and not designed for a person to sit on for any length of time. And the idea of going up 4 flights of exterior fire stairs while Callum pushed a supply cart and Rex managed the narrow metal grating and hostile operatives worked the building's interior was, objectively, not a good plan. It was, however, the available plan. "South face," she said. "Let's go." The fire stair was worse than she'd expected, and better than her worst estimate, which was the range she'd learned to operate in. Callum pushed the cart, and she held the railing when there was railing and braced against the cart frame when there wasn't, and Rex navigated the metal grating with the focus of a dog who had been in harder terrain than this and knew it. The stairwell was exposed on 3 sides, the morning air cold enough to make her eyes water slightly on the 2nd landing. And on the 3rd landing, she had to help from the railing because the cart's front wheels had developed a resistance on the incline that was going to be a problem if they had to move faster. She didn't say this out loud. They reached the 4th floor landing. The door opened from the outside, fire egress code, and they were back inside, and she felt the specific relief of being in a controlled interior space, even though the interior space currently had an unknown number of hostile operatives working through it. The neuro ward was to the left. "Rex, heel," Callum said quietly, and the dog moved to his side, and they went left. The corridor was empty. too empty. She had worked this floor long enough to know its rhythms. The morning medications run should have had 2 nurses and a pharmacy tech in this hallway, and there should have been a patient transport to imaging at 8:50, which was late, but usually only by 10 minutes or so. The absence of normal traffic was information. They cleared the floor, she said, or they locked it down and moved the staff. Either way, she kept moving. Room 414. The door was closed. Callum knocked twice, a specific pattern, short, long, and waited. The door opened. The man inside was approximately 60, with the particular thinness of someone who had been hospitalized long enough to lose the weight that comes off first. He was in a hospital bed with the head elevated, an IV line in his left arm, and eyes that were entirely alert and a face that looked like it had been carrying something heavy for a long time. He looked at Olivia. "Marsh," he said. Not a question. "Truel," she said. A pause. The kind that exists between people who have spent a long time in parallel motion toward the same point and are now, finally, in the same room. "They moved up the timeline," he said. "I noticed," she said. "Did you get it out?" She held up the flash drive. "Remote transfer completed. Local backup here. I need you to authenticate the receipt on the other end." "My phone is in the drawer," he said. "Callum, get it." Callum moved to the bedside table, and then the room's overhead light went off. Not a flicker. Not a power issue. A deliberate cut. She could tell by the pattern of which lights went and which stayed. The emergency backup strips along the baseboard came on, red tinted and low, and in the new dimness she could hear from the hallway the sound of a door being held and then released. Marcus Truel sat up straighter in his bed. "They cut the floor power," he said. That means they don't care about the cover anymore," Olivia said. The hallway door opened. The man who walked in was not wearing hospital scrubs or a lanyard. He was in civilian clothes, dark, unremarkable, and he had the particular quality of someone at Siafwan accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He stopped just inside the doorway. He looked at Olivia, and he smiled. "You transmitted it," he said. His voice was conversational, even pleasant. "I know because we just lost the outbound signal from this building's external line. Whatever you sent, it's out there now." He tilted his head slightly. "Congratulations." "It won't matter." Rex made the sound, the quiet, precise one. The man didn't look at the dog. "We're going to recover every copy," he said. "We've done it before. The people you think are your allies have very limited protection and very limited time." He looked at Truel. "And you, Marcus, you know better than anyone how this ends for people who keep pushing." Truel said nothing. Olivia was very still, because she was looking at the man in the doorway and running in the background of her mind the same calculation she ran on every piece of information she encountered, assessing, verifying, comparing against what she knew. And what she knew, suddenly and with absolute certainty, was that this man was not the top of this operation. He was sent, which meant someone above him was watching, which meant someone above him was worried enough to watch personally. "Who sent you?" she asked. The man's pleasant expression didn't change. "That's not relevant to your situation." "It is, actually," she said. "Because if someone sent you here themselves, rather than coordinating remotely, it means the remote coordination isn't reliable anymore. It means something in the chain broke." She paused. "The transfer went somewhere that scared someone." The man looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, in the corridor, she heard footsteps. More than 2 people, moving with the coordinated precision of a team executing a final position. Rex lowered into his crouch. Callum had Marcus Truel's phone in his hand and his eyes on the doorway, and the expression of a man who was calculating how many problems were about to arrive simultaneously and whether the number was manageable. The answer, by any reasonable assessment, was no. But reasonable assessments had not been particularly relevant to Olivia Marsh's situation for the last 17 months, and she had stopped deferring to them some time ago. She looked at Truel. "What's the authentication code?" Marcus. Her voice was quiet and entirely serious. "They're 30 seconds from this room. Give me the code. Whatever happens next happens, but the transfer needs to be authenticated before it does." Truel looked at her across the dim room, this man who had spent 3 years building toward a moment that was now balanced on the next 30 seconds, and he said the code. She typed it. The man in the doorway took a step forward. Rex moved. And in the hallway beyond, something entirely unexpected happened. A sound that didn't belong to any of the operatives or any of the hospital staff or any of the variables she had calculated into her planning, because she had not known it was possible and so had not calculated for it. She heard, from somewhere on the 4th floor of Harlow General Hospital, a second dog bark. The second bark came from the east end of the corridor, not frantic, not distressed, but sharp and intentional, the kind of sound a working dog makes when communicating a specific situation to a specific person. Rex answered it immediately, one short response, and Callum's head turned toward the door with the expression of a man who has just received information he didn't expect and is recalibrating fast. "That's Kira," he said. Olivia looked at him. "Webb. Truel?" "He's not the only one we brought into position," Callum said. "There's a second team. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure the situation warranted it." "The situation very clearly warrants it," she said. "I know that now." That the man in the doorway had registered the bark as information too, and his pleasant expression had developed a new quality. Not fear exactly, but the recalculation of someone who came in expecting a specific set of variables and has just discovered the set is larger than anticipated. His hand moved toward his jacket. Rex launched from his crouch, not at the man's throat, at his wrist, with the particular precision of a dog trained to neutralize rather than injure, and the impact was enough to drive the arm upward and away from the jacket, the momentum carrying them both sideways into the doorframe. The man hit the frame hard with his shoulder, made a sound that was more surprise than pain, and Rex released and repositioned immediately, placing himself between the man and the center of the room. The man straightened. He looked at the dog. He made the correct decision, which was to not reach for anything again. "How many are in the corridor?" Olivia asked. "4 when I came through," the man said, in a voice that had dropped the pleasantness entirely. "More by now." "And on the other floors?" He didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to. Callum was already at the door, looking through the gap. 2 in the near corridor, both turned toward the east end. Whatever Kira's team found, it's pulling their attention. "Then we use the 30 seconds that buys us," Olivia said. She moved to the window. Room 414 faced the building's interior courtyard, a concrete square 3 floors down with a maintenance bench and 2 dead potted trees that the hospital apparently wasn't prioritizing. No immediate exit there. But the window had a sill deep enough to be useful for something she was already thinking about. "Marcus," she turned to Truel. "The authentication went through?" He was watching his phone. "Receiving confirmation now. The transfer landed with the Oversight Committee field office in..." He stopped. "Yes, it landed. They'll move on it. The moment they verify the file integrity, which is..." He checked the screen. "Automated. It takes 4 minutes. How long before that creates visible pressure on the people in this building?" Truel was quiet for a moment. "They'll know when the committee acknowledges receipt. That's an automated notification back to the originating program's security infrastructure. So the people running this operation will know their files are in federal hands in approximately 4 minutes, she said. Give or take. Which changes the calculus, she said. Up until 4 minutes from now, they want me quiet. After 4 minutes, I'm a less urgent problem because the evidence is already out. She paused. They'll shift from extraction to cleanup. What's the difference? Callum asked. Extraction means they need me alive to find out what else I know and who else I've told. Cleanup means they don't. The room went quiet for a moment in the specific way rooms go quiet when the stakes have been stated without decoration. Truel sat up fully in his bed and pulled the IV line from his arm with the focused discomfort of someone who has made peace with a certain amount of pain being necessary. Then we need to be somewhere they can't complete a cleanup before the committee's response units reach us. We need to be visible, Olivia said. Not hidden. Somewhere with witnesses. Callum looked at her. The atrium. It was the right answer. The main atrium of Harlow General was 3 stories open at the lobby level, with a cafe, a waiting area, a pharmacy pickup window, and on a Tuesday morning, a constant flow of patients, visitors, and staff. It was the single least controllable environment in the building for anyone trying to manage a quiet operation. It was also the most dangerous place to move through if the operative in the doorway had anything left to call in. The operative, as if reading the logic, said, "You won't make it to the lobby." "We're not going to the lobby," Olivia said. She was looking at the room's wall-mounted hospital communication panel, the standard in-room system connecting to the nursing station, designed for patient calls and staff communication. Standard across the whole building, and connected through the building's internal communication infrastructure to the PA system that she had heard activated during the code gray on the 4th floor earlier. The PA access was locked behind a staff credential she didn't have. What she had was 4 months of quietly, accurately documenting system vulnerabilities. The communication panel ran on the same network node as the building's overhead paging system, and the network node had the same infrastructure software version as the workstation she'd accessed in the imaging center coordinator's office. The IT department had done a single update across all connected systems simultaneously, an efficiency decision that was, from a security standpoint, the wrong call. She crossed to the panel. "What are you doing?" Callum asked. "Changing the approach," she said. Well, she had the panel open in 90 seconds. The internal architecture was exactly what she'd expected. She found the broadcast bypass in the audio management layer, activated it through the same maintenance credential gap that had gotten her into the workstation earlier, and looked at Callum. "Close the door," she said. He closed it. The operative was still in the room, backed against the far wall, Rex between him and everyone else. She pressed the broadcast control. The entire hospital PA system opened. She had approximately 60 seconds before someone in the building's communications room would identify the unauthorized access and cut it. She used all 60 of them. She didn't perform it. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke the way she'd been trained to speak when delivering information in high-stress environments, clearly, at a pace that allowed retention, without inflection that could be dismissed as emotional. She gave her name, her professional credential, her former military assignment. She stated the name of the program, Cormorant, which she had never said out loud to anyone who wasn't directly involved with it, and which she said now into a microphone that was connected to every speaker in a 14-story hospital on a busy Tuesday morning. She stated, in plain language, what Cormorant had done to veterans and active-duty soldiers in 3 facilities over 6 years. She stated that the documentation was now in federal hands. She stated that armed operatives were currently in the building attempting to prevent that information from becoming public. She stated the name of the senior official who had authorized the original program. Dr. Harrison Greer, Deputy Director, Defense Medical Research Coordination. 12 seconds left. She said, "If anything happens to me, to Marcus Truell in room 414, or to Callum Voss and his K9 partner Rex, those names and that documentation will be on every major news network before noon." The broadcast cut. The room was silent. Then Truell made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and said, "You just made it very difficult for them to do anything that can be explained later." "That was the goal," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. Her hands, she noticed, were not. She pressed them flat against her thighs. Callum was at the door again. "The corridor is moving. I can hear it. There are people retreating toward the stairwells." "They're not retreating," the operative against the wall said. For the first time, he sounded something other than controlled. "They're repositioning. You don't understand what you've started." "I understand exactly what I've started," Olivia said. "I started it 17 months ago. I'm finishing it now." She looked at the operative directly. "Cormorant," she said. "You were part of it." He didn't answer. "I know because you knew which room Truell was in without being told," she said. "You walked directly here. You've been tracking him longer than you've been tracking me." She paused. "You're not field extraction. You're program security. You've done this before." His jaw tightened. "How many times?" she asked. "How many people did you find before they could do what I just did?" Silence. Rex watched him with the quiet intensity of an animal that had all the time in the world. The door burst open. Not the operatives, people. Different. The man who came through first was in civilian clothes but carrying a federal marshal's credential at eye level, and behind him were 2 more in the partial tactical gear of people who had been moving fast from a distance and hadn't had time to fully kit up. The second dog came in with them. Kira, a Dutch shepherd with a working dog gait similar to Rex's, who went directly to Rex and communicated something in the language of dogs that looked, to the humans in the room, like a brief mutual acknowledgement and nothing more. "Truell," the first federal marshal said. "Rafferty," Truell said, "you made good time. You activated the protocol 40 minutes ago. We were already in the city." Rafferty took in the room. Callum, Olivia, Rex, the operative against the wall, Truell sitting up with a pulled IV line and the expression of someone who has been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time. The broadcast just went building wide. "I'm aware," Truell said. Rafferty looked at Olivia. "You're Marsh." "Yes. The transfer authenticated 6 minutes ago. We have the full file." He held her eyes. "It's what Truell said it would be." She absorbed this. Something in her chest that had been compressed for so long she'd stopped noticing it as compression began, very slightly, to release. "The building," she said. "There are at least 6 operatives still inside, possibly more. They have communications gear and at least one person who is staging at the shift coordinator position on the 4th floor, His name tag read Brennan. It's not his real name." "We have people on every exit," Rafferty said. "Nobody is leaving this building who came in as part of this operation." He gestured to one of the other marshals, who crossed to the operative against the wall and removed him from the room with the efficiency of someone performing a task they have performed many times. The room population rearranged. Callum went to the window and checked the courtyard below. Old habit, she understood, the same habit she had of confirming exit positions. Truell swung his legs over the side of the bed with the stiffness of someone who had been horizontal for too long. Rex and Kira settled into positions near the door with the coordinated calm of animals that are off duty without being unready. "Harrison Greer," Rafferty said. He said it in the tone of someone confirming a target they've been circling for some time. "He authorized the initial program," Olivia said. "The documentation includes 2 internal memos with his signature authorizing the expansion of the consent protocol modifications in the 2nd program year. There's also a financial record showing a parallel payment structure to the 2 reviewing physicians who signed off on the ethics certification. The reviewing physicians, Dr. Marion Kessler and Dr. Paul Atta." She said the names the same way she'd said Greer's, without heat, without ceremony, just information that needed to be in the right place. Both are still practicing. Kessler's at a VA facility in the Northeast. Atta moved to private research 2 years ago. Rafferty was writing. His colleague was recording. And then Truell made a sharp sound. Not pain, or not only pain, and she turned to see him holding his phone with an expression she had not seen on him in the brief time she'd known him. Something close to shock. "Greer is in the building," Truell said. The room's energy changed. Rafferty looked up. "That's not possible. He's supposed to be—" "His access credential was logged at the hospital's administrative entrance 14 minutes ago," Truell said. "I have a flag on his credentials. It just triggered." He held up the phone. "He came here personally." Olivia felt the temperature of the situation shift in a way that had nothing to do with the room's actual climate. Greer was here, not managing remotely, not coordinating through intermediaries. Here, in this building, 14 minutes ago, which meant he'd been in motion before she made the broadcast, which meant he'd anticipated the timeline more accurately than she had, which meant he came to destroy the source, she said. He knew the transfer was possible. He came to prevent it, or, if it was already done, to manage the aftermath from the inside. She looked at Rafferty. He's not running. He's here because he thinks he can still control this. "Administrative floor, Sulan," Callum said from the window. "If he came in through the admin entrance, he's heading for the executive suite or the IT infrastructure room." "IT infrastructure," she said immediately. The broadcast went building wide. "He'll want to identify and isolate the access point I used to determine what else was compromised. And if he reaches the IT room before we do," Truell said, "he can make a case that the broadcast was fraudulent, unauthorized access, manipulated content. He has the authority to build that case." "He has the authority to begin building it," Olivia said. "He doesn't have the technical expertise to do it himself." "He'll have brought someone who does." She thought for 2 seconds. "The administrative floor is on 7. The IT infrastructure room is on sublevel 2, different routes. Which one? Rafferty said. IT. He's not going to executive suites right now. He needs the technical narrative established first before he talks to anyone in administration. She was already moving her chair toward the door. Sublevel 2. Marsh, Rafferty's voice had a particular quality. You need to let my team... Your team doesn't know this building, she said. I do. A pause. And I know Greer's methodology, she said. I spent 8 months inside a program he designed. I know how he thinks when he's managing a failure. She looked at Rafferty directly. You need me in that room. Rafferty looked at her for a long moment. This woman in a wheelchair who had just broadcast classified information to an entire hospital through a maintenance credential hack and was now proposing to lead a federal interception of a deputy director with nothing but 7 months of supply inventory runs and 17 months of cold calculation behind her. Stay behind my team, he said. I'll stay beside your team, she said. That's the best offer you're getting. The service elevator to sublevel 2 took 90 seconds, long enough for Rafferty to radio his team positions, long enough for Callum to check and confirm Rex's state. The dog was composed, watching the elevator doors with the forward lean of an animal that knows something is close. Long enough for Olivia to feel the full weight of her hip, which had moved from sustained complaint into the specific register of pain that signals actual damage accumulating, and to set it aside, because there was nothing to do about it right now except not stop. The elevator opened. Sublevel 2 was mechanical infrastructure, pipes, conduit, the constant low vibration of the building's central systems. The IT room was in the southeast corner, identified by the blue stripe on the access door and the biometric panel that she had already calculated they couldn't crack in time. The door was open. Someone had already gone through it. Rafferty's hand went up, stop, and his team moved into position with the discipline of people who do this correctly, not quickly, which was the right call. She held back, not because Rafferty had told her to, but because she was calculating angles and she needed 3 more seconds of information before she moved. Through the open door she could see server racks, blue indicator lights, a workstation along the far wall. A man she didn't recognize sitting at the workstation with the compressed focus of someone working fast under time pressure. And Harrison Greer, standing behind him, watching the screen. Greer was 61, white-haired, with the bearing of a man who had spent decades in rooms where his authority was not questioned. He was watching the monitor with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular configuration of someone who is still, even now, certain they are the most powerful person available. Rafferty moved through the door. Dr. Greer, he said. Greer turned. And in the moment he saw Rafferty's credential and the team behind him and the dogs and Olivia in her wheelchair at the threshold of the room, something moved across his face. Not quite fear, not quite surrender. Something more complicated than either. He had spent 6 years running a program that told itself it was necessary. He had signed the documents. He had authorized the expansions. He had reviewed the reports that described human beings as data sets and had continued signing. And now he was looking at the evidence that it was over, assembled in the doorway of a hospital sublevel, led by a woman he had tried to make invisible. Ms. Marsh, he said. His voice was entirely controlled. Whatever she'd expected from this moment, some version of confrontation, some declaration, the scene she'd imagined in fragments during 17 months of sleeplessness, it wasn't this. A man in a hospital basement saying her name like she was a scheduling problem. Dr. Greer, she said. Rafferty stepped forward. Dr. Harrison Greer, I have a federal warrant. I know what you have, Greer said. He looked at Rafferty, then back at Olivia. The transfer you executed is going to be challenged. The authentication process has irregularities that any competent defense attorney... The transfer is clean, she said. You know it is because the person who built the encryption protocol built it specifically to be unimpeachable. That was the first thing I did after the accident, before I started the nursing program, before any of this. She held his eyes. I had 14 months to build it correctly. Greer looked at her for a long moment. He turned to the man at the workstation. Stop, he said quietly. The man stopped. Rafferty moved forward, and then, from somewhere above them, from the lobby, transmitted down through the building's concrete bones. She heard it. Noise. Not panic, not chaos. The specific vocal register of a large number of people reacting to something significant simultaneously. The hospital was awake. The broadcast had reached everyone. The story was no longer containable. Rex moved to her side and pressed close, and she put her hand on his scarred head without thinking about it, and felt him solid and warm and absolutely certain of his position, and she thought, this is the moment. This is what the last 17 months were building toward. She was right. She just didn't know yet that the most important part of it hadn't happened yet, because 3 floors above them, in the stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floor, a door was about to open, and the person who walked through it was going to change everything she thought she understood about who exactly had been running Cormorant all along. And his name was not Harrison Greer. Rafferty's team had Greer in cuffs before the sound from the lobby reached them a second time, and Greer let it happen with the particular stillness of a man who has already moved to the next calculation. Not resisting, not cooperating, simply waiting for the situation to develop into something he could use. It was a quality Olivia recognized because she had spent 8 months watching him operate inside Cormorant, and the thing about Harrison Greer was that he never stopped working the room, even when the room had closed around him entirely. The technician at the workstation was a different matter. He had the shaken quality of someone who had understood himself to be a support function and had not fully processed that support functions get charged alongside principals. Rafferty's second marshal walked him out, and he went without resistance, looking at the floor. Callum was already in the IT room checking the workstation's active processes, what the technician had been doing in the 60 seconds before they arrived, what he'd touched, whether anything had been altered or deleted from the hospital's broadcast records. Rex positioned himself near Greer with the economy of a working dog who doesn't waste attention on a secured target but doesn't take his eyes off it either. Nothing was successfully modified, Callum said. He got into the broadcast logs but didn't have time to do anything with them. The access timestamp is clean. Good, Olivia said. She was watching Greer, who was watching her back with the quality of a man taking inventory. The transfer landing, Greer said. His voice was pitched for her specifically, not for the room. You think that's the end of it? I think it's the end of this part of it, she said. The committee that received your files specs 3 of the 7 oversight members have direct funding relationships with the research division that housed Cormorant. They will manage the intake process. They will determine what is referred and what is contained. He held her eyes. You transmitted everything to a system that is partially run by the people you're trying to expose. Did that occur to you? It had. It was, in fact, one of the 17 things she had lain awake calculating during the months of building the transfer protocol. The transmission went to the Oversight Committee, she said, and simultaneously to a congressional subcommittee staffer, 2 investigative journalists, and a federal whistleblower legal office whose intake process is public record, and therefore creates a documented chain the moment the files were received. She paused. The 4 redundant recipients exist precisely because the primary oversight system has the vulnerabilities you just described. Greer's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. You planned for institutional capture, he said. I planned for everything I could think of, she said. And then I assumed I'd missed something and planned for that too. Rafferty had a hand on Greer's arm and was moving him toward the door. Greer went, and then stopped, with the specific quality of a man who has just remembered something or decided to play something, and turned back toward her. There's a man in this building, Greer said, who is not part of my team, who is not connected to Cormorant in any documentation you have, who has been running an operation inside this hospital for the last 6 weeks that has nothing to do with finding you. He let that land. Ask Truell who gave him the Calloway lead. Ask him what name came first. Rafferty pulled him through the door. The IT room was quiet. Callum had stopped working at the terminal. Rex was looking at the door Greer had gone through with his ears slightly forward, the posture of an animal that has heard something and is deciding whether it requires action. Olivia sat with Greer's words in the space where they'd landed and felt the specific cold of information that changes the shape of what you thought you understood. She turned her chair toward the door. Callum, she said, who gave Truell the Calloway lead? A beat, 1 second too long for a clean answer. He said it came from a secondary source inside the committee infrastructure. Callum said. Someone who'd been tracking Cormorant independently. A name? Another beat. He gave me a partial, Callum said. Referred to as Lyndon. No first name, no credential. Truell said it was a protected source. Lyndon. She ran the name through everything she had. 6 years of program documentation, personnel files, the organizational charts she had memorized before filing her first report. It didn't match anything in Cormorant's structure. It didn't match anything in the defense contractor hierarchy she'd mapped, which meant it was either a pseudonym for someone she knew by another designation, or it was someone she'd never been allowed to see. Both possibilities were worse than no name at all. They took the service elevator back to 4. Truell was where they'd left him, dressed now in the civilian clothes someone had retrieved from his bedside bag, sitting in the chair beside his unmade bed with his phone on the table, and the expression of a man whose plan had executed and who is now in the part that comes after the plan, which is always more complicated than the plan accounts for. He looked at her when she came through the door and said, before she could speak, "Greer talked." "He did," she said. "What did he say?" "He said to ask you about Lyndon." Truell's expression moved, not dramatically, a tightening around the eyes, a slight shift in his jaw. The expression of someone who has been carrying a piece of information and has just been told they no longer get to decide when to put it down. "Lyndon is the reason I came to Callaway," Truell said. "I gathered that." "He's not—" Truell stopped, started differently. "When I began pulling the financial thread on Cormorant 3 years ago, the money was clean on the surface. Defense contractor research allocation, properly categorized, properly reviewed. It took 8 months to find the secondary payment structure. And when I found it, the payments were going to a holding entity that didn't connect to any personnel I could identify inside the program." "Greer wasn't the original architect," Olivia said. "Greer ran it, day to day, personnel decisions, protocol design, the ethics certification falsification. That was all Greer." Truell looked at her steadily. "But the program was funded and protected by someone above him. Someone who is not in any of the documentation you compiled, because by the time you were inside Cormorant, Lyndon had already stepped back from direct involvement." "Stepped back to where?" "Medical Oversight Board for the Federal Contractor Consortium," Truell said. "Clean position. Appropriate distance. Enough deniability that even the documentation you've transmitted doesn't connect him to the program directly." Olivia felt the shape of the problem settle into focus. All of it. The 17 months, the accident, the nursing program, the transfer, the broadcast, had been aimed at a target that was real but incomplete. Greer was a genuine criminal who had done genuine harm. The evidence was genuine. The charges would hold, and the person who had made Greer possible would review the situation from a clean position and continue. "Where is he?" she asked. "That's the part I couldn't confirm before today," Truell said. "But 6 weeks ago, someone matching Lyndon's profile was admitted to Harlow General for a cardiac procedure. Elective. Scheduled weeks in advance." He paused. The name on the admission was a variant, different enough to avoid automated flagging, similar enough that when I saw it in the transfer data from the committee's secondary intake, I recognized the pattern. Or Rafferty, who had come back into the room after securing Greer with his team, said, "You're telling me the person above Greer is a patient in this hospital?" "Was a patient," Truell said. "He was discharged 4 days ago." He picked up his phone and showed the screen. "But his discharge address is a hotel 2 miles from here, the Aldrin. And his car, registered to the holding entity, which I traced through the financial records in Olivia's transfer, is in the hospital parking structure. Level 3. The car was in the parking structure, which meant either Lyndon had returned to the hospital after discharge, or he had never left, had stayed nearby specifically to monitor how the situation with Olivia resolved, close enough to manage it personally if needed." "Greer told me Lyndon is in this building," Olivia said. The room recalibrated. Rafferty got on his radio. The hospital's security feeds came up on Truell's laptop through a remote access that Rafferty's team had established when they staged in the building. 14 camera angles cycling through floors and corridors and the lobby where the noise had been and still was. A significant number of people who had heard the broadcast and not left, clustering in the atrium in the specific way that people cluster when something has happened and they don't fully understand what, but understand that it matters. She scanned the feeds. Level 3 of the parking structure had 2 cameras. Both were currently offline. "When did those go out?" she asked. Rafferty's tech ran the timestamp. 47 minutes ago, before the broadcast. Before Rafferty's team had full position in the building, before any of the morning's visible activity had begun, someone had cut those cameras with enough advanced knowledge of the timeline to do it before the timeline became apparent to anyone watching. He knew, Callum said quietly. He knew how this was going to go before it started. He knew Cormorant was compromised, Olivia said. He's known for some time. The escalation over the last 9 days wasn't Greer moving independently. It was an accelerated extraction protocol that someone above Greer authorized because they needed to resolve the Olivia problem before the transfer could happen. It didn't work, Callum said. No, she agreed. Which means his next move is not about the program anymore. The program is over, he knows that. His next move is about himself, specifically about whether the evidence we have connects to him directly. Does it? Rafferty asked. She thought for a moment, carefully. The financial records show the holding entity. The holding entity connects to an identity I didn't have a name for when I built the transfer. I documented what I could find, and Lyndon was beyond what I could find. She paused. But Truell's work on the financial thread combined with the records in my transfer might create a connection that neither document makes individually. Cross-referenced, Truell said. If someone does the work of putting them together, yes. She looked at Rafferty. Has your team received authorization to cross-reference the 2 document sets? That's above my operational authority, Rafferty said. That requires the committee to... The committee has 3 compromised members, she said. I know that. So the cross-referencing won't happen through official channels for days, maybe weeks. And in that window, Lyndon walks, Callum said. The words sat in the room. Rafferty's radio crackled. One of his team members on the lobby level, a commotion near the pharmacy pickup, 2 individuals trying to exit through a side door that had been secured. Rafferty stepped out. Olivia looked at the parking structure camera feeds, both still dark, looked at the lobby cameras, where the cluster of people in the atrium had grown and a local news van was visible through the main entrance glass. Someone had called it in. The broadcast had crossed the hospital walls. The morning was accelerating outside the building at the same pace it was accelerating inside. She thought about Lyndon in the parking structure. She thought about the holding entity and the payment records and the 7 years of careful distance that had kept him invisible. She thought about this 400 pages of clinical observation notes in her transfer, and specifically about 18 pages she had not included in the remote transfer because they had been in a secondary encrypted partition that required a separate authentication step she hadn't had time to complete. 18 pages that included, because she had been thorough in a way that had felt like paranoia at the time and felt like accuracy now, the financial authorization chain for the year Cormorant's budget had tripled, including a signature block she had found in a secondary document 3 weeks before she filed her first report, attached to a program expansion authorization that she had photographed on a hospital facility tour she had not been supposed to be on. She had included those 18 pages in the local backup, on the flash drive, which was in her bag. She looked at Callum. I need a secure device with network access. He looked at her. For what? There's a secondary partition in the local backup that didn't transfer remotely. It has a financial authorization chain that includes a signature connecting Lyndon to a direct program decision. She held up the flash drive. If I can transmit it to Truell's committee contact, not through the committee intake, through the direct line Truell used when he first made contact with the field office, it becomes part of the authenticated record before Lyndon can establish distance. Truell already had his phone out. My contact at the field office has a secure intake address, outside the committee infrastructure entirely. He's field division, not oversight. How long does transmission take through that channel? 8 minutes to verify. Faster if he's already watching his intake after the first transfer landed. Callum had a phone out, his own, different from the one she'd seen him use in the hospital, which told her something about how he'd structured his preparation for today. He connected a cable to her flash drive and handed her the device. She opened the secondary partition, The 18 pages were there, intact, untouched for 17 months, and still exactly what they were. A chain of authorization that ended with a signature she had spent 6 years not knowing how to place, and 3 weeks before the accident identifying with the specific sick certainty of someone who has just found the thing that explains everything. She transmitted it. 8 minutes. She looked at the clock. What? The parking structure situation developed 4 minutes into the wait. Rafferty came back into the room moving faster than he had been moving before, and his expression had the compressed quality of someone receiving information at a pace slightly faster than comfortable. Vehicle on level 3 just activated. Security is trying to get the cameras back online, but whoever cut them did it at the physical relay, not the network. It's going to take 10 minutes to restore. He's moving, Callum said. The structure exits onto 2 roads, Olivia said. The North Service Road comes out behind the hospital. The main exit ramp comes out on Meridian Avenue in front. I have teams on both, Rafferty said, but if he goes through the structure to the connecting walkway on level 2, the walkway connects to the hospital's east wing, she said. Level 2 of the east wing is the administrative corridor. Rafferty was already back on the radio. She checked the transmission progress. 6 minutes, 30 seconds. The field office contact had acknowledged receipt 40 seconds in, which meant he was watching, which meant the intake was running. She looked at Truell. If he makes it to the administrative floor before the transmission completes, he can't suppress it, Truell said. Not anymore. The moment the field office acknowledged receipt, it entered a documented chain. He knows that, she said. He's not trying to suppress the transmission. He's trying to reach a position where he can claim he was here in a medical capacity and has no knowledge of any operational activity. His car is in the structure, Callum said, that connects him to the holding entity. Which connects him to the financial records, she said. Yes, but connections require someone to assert them formally, and formal assertions require time, Truell said. Time, she agreed. The radio in Rafferty's hand erupted. She couldn't make out the words, but she could read his face, and what she read was, someone had gotten through. Rafferty moved. His remaining marshal moved with him. Callum looked at Olivia. Stay, he said, and she heard in it not condescension, but the simple accuracy of a person who has assessed a physical situation. I know, she said. He went. Rex stayed. The room was quiet. Truell sat with his phone and watched the transmission progress. She sat with her hands in her lap and did the thing she'd learned to do in situations where there was nothing to do except wait. She cataloged everything she could see, everything she could hear, the 17 months of choices that had led to this room, this chair, this Tuesday morning where the thing she had started alone in a different life was finally, imperfectly, loudly reaching its conclusion. 7 minutes, 40 seconds, 7:50, 8 minutes. Truell's phone lit up. He read it, looked up at her. Received and authenticated. The field division contact has flagged it as a priority, supplemental to the primary transfer. It's been assigned a case reference number. He held the phone out so she could see the screen. It's in. She looked at the reference number for a moment, a specific sequence of characters on a phone screen in a hospital room in a city she had chosen because it was far from everyone who knew what she used to be. It was enough. 8 months of nursing paperwork and supply runs and being invisible on purpose. 3 reports that nobody in the right position had acted on. A car that had run her off a road because she'd been too honest too early with the wrong system. 17 months of building something airtight in the margins of a life she'd constructed to look like nothing. It was enough. The transmission was in. Greer was in custody. The broadcast had gone to every person in a 14-story building and out through every phone that had been recording it in the lobby. The news van outside had been there for 20 minutes. It was done. This part. She released a breath. Then the door opened, and it wasn't Callum, and it wasn't Rafferty, and Rex came to his feet with a speed and quality of attention that she had not seen from him since the corridor on the 4th floor when the man in blue scrubs had reached for his radio. The man in the doorway was 65, with white hair and the bearing of someone whose authority was structural rather than performed, built into the way he occupied space, the way his eyes moved through a room. He was wearing civilian clothes that were expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. He was not carrying anything visible. He looked at her with the expression of someone assessing a situation they have already, in some internal calculation, accepted. "Ms. Marsh," he said. His voice was the thing she recognized, not from a face or a name or a personnel file, from a recording. 6 minutes of audio she had captured during a program review meeting she had attended as a note-taker in her 4th month inside Cormorant, a recording she had included in the secondary partition that had just been transmitted to the Federal Field Division. A voice discussing consent protocol modifications with the comfortable authority of someone who had written the original consent protocols. "Lyndon," she said. He stepped into the room. Rex moved forward 3 inches, and Lyndon stopped. "The transmission you just completed," he said, "includes a recording of my voice in an administrative context. Legal counsel will argue that an advisory voice on a program review recording does not constitute direct operational involvement." He paused. "I want you to know that before you decide how to respond to the next few minutes." "The next few minutes?" she said. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I want to be direct about that. What happened to your vehicle 17 months ago was not authorized by me. I want to be direct about that too." "Was it authorized by Greer?" A pause. "It was an independent decision made by security personnel acting on what they believed was program protection protocol." "That's a very careful way of saying yes," she said. Rex was watching Lyndon with the focused stillness of an animal that has made a complete assessment and is holding it in suspension. Not attacking, not retreating, simply absolutely present, in the way that working dogs are present, in a way that costs a person something to be on the receiving end of. Lyndon looked at the dog for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. "I know this animal," he said. She went still. "Rex," Lyndon said. "Unit designation K7, 3rd cohort." Cormorant's Companion Research Division ran parallel to the human program. Military working dogs with specific neurological profiles. He looked at the scar along Rex's jaw. He was part of the protocol's first year. The room was completely silent. Truel had gone very still in his chair. Lyndon looked back at Olivia. "The dog that's been protecting you was one of the program's original experimental subjects, which means everything he's done today, every choice he's made in this building, he made with the neurological profile that my program shaped." He said it without pride, without apology, simply as a fact. "I don't expect that to matter to you. I'm telling you because I think you should know the full picture of what you've been fighting." Rex did not move. But something in the room did. Some quality of the moment shifted in a way she couldn't immediately name because she was looking at this dog who had knelt beside her in a corridor at 7:41 in the morning and had not left her side since, and understanding something about the shape of the last 17 months that she had not understood before. And then Callum's voice came through the room's open door from the corridor, sharp and immediate. "He's here. 4:14. And 2 more federal marshals came through the door, and Lyndon looked at Olivia one last time with the expression of a man who has run his final calculation and arrived at an answer he doesn't like, and said, "The recording won't be enough." She looked back at him. "You're right," she said. "The recording alone isn't enough. But the recording, combined with the financial authorization chain, combined with the testimony of the 17 surviving patients in the 2nd cohort who have been waiting for someone to find them for 4 years." She reached into her bag and produced a second flash drive, smaller than the first, a different color. "I found them," she said. "All 17. Their statements are on this drive. They've been waiting for the authentication of the primary documentation before coming forward. That authentication happened 8 minutes ago." Lyndon looked at the drive. 17 witnesses, she said, who can describe from the inside what your program did to them, in their own words, with medical corroboration." She held the drive out to the marshal who was moving to take Lyndon's arm. "That goes to the same field contact, same secure intake, same reference number." The marshal took it. Lyndon said nothing. He let them take his arms. He walked toward the door in the manner of a man who is still, somewhere in his calculation, looking for the move that doesn't exist anymore. His eyes went to Rex once more as he passed, and Rex watched him go with the complete, unemotional attention of an animal that knows exactly what it's looking at and needs nothing else from this moment. The door closed. Olivia sat in the quiet room and felt the full weight of her body. The hip, the hands, the specific exhaustion that lives behind the eyes after a long time of being exactly as careful as the situation requires. Truel was sitting very still. Through the window, the morning light had changed. It was past 9 now, the day fully underway in the way days are fully underway when something has permanently altered the landscape. Callum came through the door. He looked at her, looked at Rex. "Lyndon's in custody," he said. "Both exits are secure. The lobby has... It's a lot of people down there." "I know," she said. "Are you..." He started, stopped. "No," she said honestly. "Not particularly. But I'm done." She looked at her hands in her lap. "It's done." Rex crossed the room and sat beside her and put his scarred head against her knee, and she put her palm on the top of his head and felt him warm and solid and entirely certain of his position. Outside, through the hospital's concrete and glass, she could hear the city beginning to process what the morning had produced. And from down the corridor, from the direction of the nursing station, where 7 months ago a doctor had told a colleague she was a warm body filling a slot, she heard footsteps, many of them coming toward this room. And she understood with the particular clarity that follows a very long time of waiting that the part of the story where nobody looked at her was over. What she didn't know yet was that among those footsteps was someone she had believed, with complete certainty, was dead. The footsteps stopped outside room 414. Then the door opened, and the person who walked through it was a woman in her mid-50s, wearing a federal identification lanyard over civilian clothes, with the particular quality of someone who has been traveling for a long time and arrived precisely when they intended to. She had a face that Olivia recognized from a photograph she had looked at so many times it had started to feel like memory rather than documentation. The photograph she'd found in a personnel file 3 weeks before the accident, attached to a termination notice dated 14 months before she herself had joined the program. Dr. Sarah Van, Senior Medical Oversight Analyst, Cormorant's original internal auditor, assigned in year 2 of the program to conduct a routine compliance review. Her termination notice had listed the reason as performance and restructuring. Her file after that point was blank. No subsequent employment record, no professional license activity, no public presence of any kind. Olivia had concluded with the logic available to her at the time that blank files meant one of 2 things. She had been wrong about which one. "You're alive," Olivia said. Sarah Van looked at her across the room with the expression of someone who has been carrying a very specific weight for a very long time and has just been told she can set it down. "Barely, for a while," she said. "Less barely, recently." "Your file was sanitized by the same security apparatus that altered yours," Van said, "except they did it 3 years earlier and they were less careful about the method, which is why there were traces I was able to use later." She came into the room fully and looked at Truel. "Marcus?" "Sarah," Truel said. He said it in the tone of people who have communicated through intermediaries for so long that direct address feels strange. "You knew she was alive," Olivia said to Truel. "I knew she was the source," Truel said. "Lyndon's name, it came from Sarah. She'd identified him before I had the financial thread to confirm it, but she was still in a protected position and direct contact wasn't possible until today," Van said. She looked at Olivia steadily. "Until you made direct contact unnecessary by doing what you did this morning." The room had the quality of a space where several separate timelines had just converged, and none of the people in it had the full picture of all of them, and everyone was quietly assembling the version they were missing. Olivia looked at Van and felt something she hadn't anticipated. Not relief, exactly, and not anger, though there was a thread of that too, because Van being alive and operational for 3 years, while Olivia had spent 17 months rebuilding from a wheelchair, was information that had a specific weight to it. She let herself feel the weight honestly. She didn't perform anything about it. "You could have reached me," she said. "I know," Van said. "The risk assessment said..." "I know what the risk assessment said," Olivia said. "I'm saying you could have reached me anyway." Van held her eyes and didn't defend it. That was the right response, and Olivia registered it as such. "You're right," Van said simply. "I made a calculation that protected the operation and cost you more time alone. I'm not going to tell you it was the wrong call strategically. I'm going to tell you it's the thing I'll carry from this. A moment passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the recognition of a debt acknowledged honestly, which is where forgiveness eventually starts, if it starts at all. Callum, who had been in the doorway through this, said, "The lobby situation is developing. There are 4 news outlets now. Rafferty is asking whether Olivia can come down." She looked at Callum. Then she looked at Rex, who was still beside her chair with the patient certainty of an animal that goes where she goes. "Tell Rafferty yes," she said. "Some." The service elevator to the lobby felt different going down than it had going up. She couldn't have said precisely why. The elevator was the same. The sub-level smell was the same. Her hip was worse than it had been 4 hours ago, and the cart was gone, and she was back in her wheelchair, which someone had retrieved from the imaging suite hallway. But the quality of the descent was different. Something had changed in the fundamental atmosphere of the building, and she could feel it in the way you feel a shift in air pressure before weather changes. Not dramatic, just undeniably present. The lobby doors opened. The atrium of Harlow General was not designed for what was currently happening in it. The cafe had stopped serving, the pharmacy pickup window had a handwritten closed sign, and the space that was normally organized around the movement of patients and visitors and staff had reorganized itself around something else entirely. Approximately 200 people, most of them staff in scrubs or civilians who had been in the building when the broadcast went out and had not left, arranged in the particular formation of people who don't know each other but have been temporarily bonded by a shared experience of something significant. They looked at her when the lobby doors opened. She had not prepared for this. She had prepared with considerable thoroughness for the legal architecture of the morning, for the tactical requirements, for 17 different failure scenarios. She had not prepared for 200 people looking at her in the lobby of a hospital where 7 months ago she had been told to stay out of the way. She moved forward anyway. The first person to step toward her was Danny Reyes, the nurse who had delivered Pruitt's paperwork request that morning, with the grace to look slightly uncomfortable about it. Danny looked now like someone who had spent the last hour reassessing several things. "I heard the broadcast," Danny said. "The whole floor heard it." "I know," Olivia said. We didn't know who you were. What had happened to you?" "No," Olivia said. "That was the arrangement." Danny opened her mouth and closed it, which was the honest response to a situation that didn't resolve neatly into an apology or an explanation or any of the things social scripts suggest for moments like this. The truth was more complicated. Danny hadn't been cruel specifically. She had been ordinary. She had participated in a culture that treated Olivia as a non-entity. An ordinary participation in that kind of culture is its own category of thing. Not monstrous, but not innocent either. Olivia didn't tell her it was fine. It wasn't entirely fine. But she nodded and she kept moving because there was something she needed to do before anything else happened in this atrium. Rafferty was near the main entrance with 2 of his marshals, and the particular controlled energy of someone managing a situation that keeps expanding. He moved toward her when she crossed the lobby. "Federal investigators are arriving from the regional office," he said. "ETA 40 minutes. They'll want to debrief you formally." "I know. The news outlets outside, I can't keep them off the public entrance much longer." "You don't need to," she said. He looked at her. "Marsh, I made a broadcast to a hospital," she said. "That's the opposite of keeping it quiet. Let them in." Rafferty assessed this for a moment. "If you speak to press before the formal debrief, I'm not going to speak to press," she said. "I'm going to stand in a lobby where press is present. There's a difference." She paused. "The 17 witnesses, have they been contacted?" "The field division made initial contact with the first 3 on the list 40 minutes ago," Rafferty said. "All 3 confirmed willingness to provide formal statements. The others are being reached." "Good." She felt something release in her chest, a different tension than the one that had released when the transmission authenticated. This one was older, more personal. 17 survivors of Cormorant's second cohort who had been carrying what was done to them without any institutional acknowledgement that it had been done, that it was real, that someone had found them and was using their words as evidence. Make sure they have legal representation arranged before any formal statement process begins. Federal whistleblower protection applies. Make sure they know that. Already in motion, Rafferty said. He said it with a quality that communicated she was telling him things he knew, but said it without condescension, which she registered. She turned toward the atrium. Callum found her near the cafe, which had resumed operating on the grounds that people who had been standing in a lobby for 90 minutes needed coffee, and the staff had made a collective decision to be useful about it. Rex was at her side. Kira was with Rafferty's team near the entrance. The two dogs had acknowledged each other's presence throughout the morning with the economy of working animals who understand the division of a task. Van is talking to the federal team upstairs, Callum said. She has documentation of her own, 3 years of it. She's been building a parallel record since she went under. Of course she has, Olivia said. She said it without bitterness. Van was exactly the kind of person who would spend 3 years in the dark building something precise, and it was exactly what the situation required, and the fact that Olivia had done the same thing alone and in less controlled circumstances was simply the shape of how it had gone. She asked me to tell you, Callum said, that the primary fact she needs the federal team to understand is that Cormorant's experimental protocols were not aberrations. They were structured into the program's original design. Greer implemented them, but they were written into the framework before Greer was assigned to run anything. Lyndon designed them, Olivia said. Yes. That's why the 17 witnesses matter, she said. Greer can argue implementation, Lyndon can argue distance, but the program's original design with the consent modifications built in from the first year, that's Lyndon's architecture. The witnesses experienced it in year 1, before Greer was even a factor. Callum was quiet for a moment. You figured all of this out in 8 months inside a program that was actively trying to obscure its own structure. 6 weeks, she said. The other 2 months were documentation. He looked at her in the way that people look at someone when they're revising an estimate upward. She recognized the look. She had seen versions of it in military contexts, in clinical contexts, in every room where she had been underestimated and then not. She had stopped finding it satisfying in the abstract. This morning it didn't produce the clean vindication that sometimes arrived in those moments. What it produced was a more complicated feeling. The recognition that all of this had cost too much to feel like a win in any simple sense. People had been experimented on. She had been run off a road. Sarah Van had spent 3 years in hiding. 17 men and women had carried injuries and altered neurological profiles for years, without anyone in an official capacity telling them it had been done to them. It's not a victory, she said, aloud, not exactly to Callum. No, he said. It's a reckoning. Those are different. She thought about that. He was right. A victory has a clean edge. A reckoning has the shape of something that's been broken for a long time, being examined carefully enough to understand how it broke, so that the people who broke it can be held to account, and the people who were broken by it can begin the longer, messier process of what comes after. Rex pressed against her wheel. She put her hand on him. What happened to him? She asked. In the program. The Companion Research Division ran parallel protocols, Callum said. Neurological stimulation, response modification, behavioral shaping. The technical notes in the Cormorant documentation describe it as enhancement research. He said the last 2 words in a tone that communicated exactly what he thought of them. Rex was in the first cohort. He was retired from the program after 14 months. The notes say he became unpredictable, difficult to manage. Because he stopped following orders he disagreed with, she said. Callum looked at the dog. That's what I think happened. That's not what the notes say. She scratched behind Rex's ear, and he turned his head into it with the uncomplicated satisfaction of an animal that does not require the moment to be more than it is. A scarred dog and a woman in a wheelchair in a hospital lobby on a Tuesday morning, both of them shaped by a program that had tried to make them into something more controllable and had failed, and both of them still here. There was something in that worth holding on to. Dr. Randall Pruitt arrived at the lobby at 10:47. She saw him before he saw her. He came through the corridor from the elevator bank with the expression of someone who has been on a floor where federal investigators are conducting interviews and has decided the lobby is a more comfortable environment. He had his ID badge in his hand, the way people hold their ID badges when they're trying to indicate that they belong somewhere and would like this to be acknowledged. He stopped when he saw her. The lobby had thinned somewhat. Some people had left, some had moved to the outer corridors, but there were still enough present to constitute an audience, and Pruitt understood this immediately in the way that people with social antennae understand the composition of a room. He said, "Miss Marsh," she said, "Dr. Pruitt." A pause that had a lot of weight in it. "I heard the broadcast," he said. "Most people in this building did." He was clearly searching for something that would function as the right response to this moment and not finding it, because there isn't one. There is no arrangement of words that adequately addresses the gap between what he had believed about her and what the morning had revealed. And people like Pruitt, who are accustomed to being the most informed person in their immediate vicinity, struggle visibly with the experience of having been wrong in a way that is now public. "The pharmaceutical discrepancy logs," she said, not as an accusation, as information. "The ones with gaps that don't match the volumes being moved. I flagged them internally 3 months ago. The flag was marked reviewed and cleared, but the underlying discrepancy wasn't addressed." She held his eyes. "Federal investigators are going to find those logs today. I'd recommend you have a clear account of your involvement or non-involvement ready." Pruitt's face went through several things in rapid succession. That's not connected to... I don't know whether it's connected to Cormorant or whether it's a separate issue," she said with complete honesty. "I don't have enough information to know. But the investigators will look at everything unusual in this hospital's records today, and that's an unusual pattern, and I thought you should know I documented it." She paused. "Because I'm thorough, not because I was building a case against you specifically." He stood there for a moment longer and then walked away, not quickly, but with the particular focused pace of a man who needs to make a phone call. She watched him go. Callum beside her said, "Was that mercy or strategy?" "Accuracy," she said. "I genuinely don't know if he's involved in anything. I know the discrepancy exists. I know it will be found. Giving him information he needs serves the truth better than sitting on it." She paused. "Also, if he is involved in something separate, the worst thing he can do is try to hide it further, and the best thing he can do is come forward. I just made that calculus visible to him." "That's both mercy and strategy," Callum said. "Maybe," she said. "I've stopped trying to keep those categories clean." Ches. The federal investigators arrived at 11:23. There were 6 of them, from the regional office and from a specialized unit whose jurisdiction covered military research program violations. A unit that had existed for 4 years and had never previously had a case large enough to fully activate it. Rafferty briefed them in the administrative conference room on the 8th floor, while Truell and Van provided the documentary foundation. Olivia was asked to wait. She waited in a family consultation room on the 4th floor with Callum and Rex and a cup of coffee that was better than the break room coffee and worse than what she would have made herself. And she sat with the particular quality of a person who has been in motion for so long that stillness feels temporarily foreign. Her hip was at the level she privately categorized as a problem for later. Tomorrow's issue, not today's, but accumulating interest. She thought about the 17 witnesses. She thought about what it would mean to them when their statements became part of a federal case, when the thing that had been done to them in clinical settings with official authorization was officially, legally, on the record as something that had been done. There is a specific kind of injury that comes from institutional denial, from being the person who says this happened to me and being met with the apparatus of an institution saying, "No, it didn't, here's the paperwork." She knew that injury from a particular angle. The 17 knew it from another. Documentation didn't undo the physical reality of what had been done to any of them, but it ended the part where the institution got to decide what was true. That mattered. She had spent 17 months being certain it mattered, and she was still certain. At 12:15, one of Rafferty's marshals came to the door and said she was needed upstairs. The conference room on 8 had the particular atmosphere of a space that has been converted from its normal purpose by the arrival of people with a different kind of authority. Laptops, case files, a whiteboard that someone had started diagramming with names and connections. Rafferty near the window. Truell at the table. Van at the far end, with a quality of presence that had recalibrated now that she was no longer operating from concealment. The lead investigator was a woman named Devlin, 40s, with the specific precision of someone who has spent a career building cases that need to be unimpeachable. She looked at Olivia for a long moment before speaking. "The primary transfer authenticated," Devlin said. "The supplemental partition authenticated. Dr. Van's parallel documentation has been received and is being cross-referenced. We have statements from 4 of the 17 witnesses so far. By end of day, we expect to have statements from all 17. She paused. "I want to tell you what we're looking at, so you understand the scope." "Tell me," Olivia said. "Harrison Greer will face federal charges on 6 counts, including criminal conspiracy, fraud in the conduct of human research, and obstruction. The 2 certifying physicians, Kessler and Atta, will face license revocation proceedings and criminal referral within 30 days. Devlin looked at the notes in front of her. "The man you identified as Linden, his full name is Warren Lyndon Carruth, formerly Senior Director of Research Architecture for the Contractor Consortium, will face the most complex case because his direct operational involvement requires the cross-referencing of multiple document sets. That will take time. His attorney has already made contact with our office." "He'll argue distance," Olivia said. "He'll try," Devlin said. "The financial authorization chain you transmitted connects him to 2 direct program decisions. The witness statements, if they hold, establish the consent protocol as a designed feature rather than an implementation failure. And Dr. Van's documentation includes meeting notes from year 1 that place Carruth in a program design session that discussed the consent modification strategy explicitly." She paused. "It will not be fast, but it will hold." "What about the committee members with funding relationships to the contractor consortium?" "That's a separate investigation that will be initiated by a different division. The receipt of your documentation through the field channel creates a documented record that makes suppression by the oversight committee impossible. They received it, it's time-stamped, and attempting to bury it at this point creates additional exposure for anyone who tries." Devlin held her eyes. "You planned for that." "I planned for institutional capture," Olivia said. "Yes." Devlin nodded. She looked at Olivia with the quality of someone making an assessment they don't often make out loud. "Your military record," she said. "The alterations that were made to indicate psychological instability." "Yes." "The process to restore a record to its prior state requires a formal review, which typically takes—" "I know how long it takes," Olivia said. "Our office can flag it as a priority supplemental to an active federal case," Devlin said. "That shortens the timeline significantly. With your consent, we'd like to do that." Olivia looked at the table for a moment. A military record was a specific kind of document. It said who you had been, what you had done, what had been determined about your competence and your character by institutions that had the authority to make those determinations. Her record said she had been unstable, unreliable, a problem that had been correctly managed. She had lived inside that lie for 17 months because it was what the system had put on her, and the system had the power to make it stick. "Yes," she said. "Flag it, Arham." The hospital held a press position at 2 in the afternoon outside the main entrance on Meridian Avenue. Rafferty's team managed the perimeter. Devlin's office made a brief statement about the nature and scope of the federal investigation. Truell was present but did not speak. His position was still formally protected even with Linden in custody, and Devlin's team had made the correct call about his public exposure. Van spoke briefly. She was good at it, precise, not performative, the quality of someone who had been waiting a long time to say something true in public, and had therefore thought carefully about exactly which true things to say. Olivia did not speak. She stood beside the entrance, sat technically in her chair, with Rex at her side and Callum 2 steps behind, and she was present, visibly, in the frame of every camera that was pointed at the hospital's front face, and that was enough. More than enough. She had broadcast her own name to 14 floors of people at 9 in the morning. The visual record of her presence outside a hospital where federal investigators were arresting a senior official of a classified military research program communicated everything that needed to be communicated without requiring her to perform anything additional for anyone. A reporter got through the perimeter briefly, young, with the specific energy of someone trying to establish themselves by asking the question nobody else asked, and got close enough to say, "Ms. Marsh, how does it feel?" "It feels like something that isn't finished yet," she said, simply and honestly. "Ask me again in a year." The reporter started to follow up, and Rex turned his head, and the reporter reconsidered. She had not planned that answer. It was just the accurate one. The morning had been what it had been. Necessary, correct, the result of 17 months of meticulous and lonely work. But standing outside a hospital in the afternoon light with her name on a federal case file and a dog against her wheel was not the end of something so much as the end of one particular part of something. The 17 witnesses still had a long road in front of them. The federal case would take years. Her legs were not going to work differently because of what had happened today. What was finished was the part where the institution got to define her. That part was done. At 4:30, she went back inside. Not to her unit, not to the supply cabinet, or the intake charts, or the chair at the nurse's station, where she had spent 7 months being overlooked by people who thought overlooking her was a reasonable allocation of their attention. She went to the nursing director's office on the administrative corridor. A woman named Holloway, who Olivia had spoken to exactly twice in 7 months, both times in the context of scheduling adjustments. Holloway was at her desk. She stood when Olivia came through the door, which was different from the previous 2 times. "Ms. Marsh," she said. "I'm not here to resign," Olivia said, because that seemed like the thing that needed to be established first. "And I'm not here to make demands. I want to be direct about what I want." Holloway gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please." Olivia moved to it. Rex settled beside her. She looked at Holloway steadily. "This hospital has a veteran patient population that is not well served by its current care structure," she said. "Not through malice, through gaps in how care is coordinated, in how neurological injury presents differently in veteran patients, and how the specific intersection of trauma and physical medicine requires a different approach than standard medical surgical care provides." She paused. "I know this because I spent 8 months inside a program that exploited those gaps. I know what they are in specific detail." Holloway said nothing. She was listening in the way that people listen when they understand the conversation they're in. "I want to build something here," Olivia said. "A coordinated care framework specifically for veteran patients with neurological and physical trauma profiles. I want the authority to design the clinical protocols, to recruit a small team, and to have a direct line to administration when I need resources. I want a formal title and a formal salary that reflects the actual work, not the work that someone decided a nurse in a wheelchair was suitable for." She held Holloway's eyes. "I'm not asking for recognition. I'm asking for the structure to do something useful." Holloway was quiet for a moment. "I should have been paying closer attention to what was happening on this floor," she said. "That's not an excuse. It's an acknowledgement." "I know," Olivia said. "I'm not here for the acknowledgement. I'm here because the need is real, and I'm the person with the specific knowledge to address it, and this hospital is the place where I can build it." "I'll need to take it to the board," Holloway said. "Of course. Given what happened today, the board's disposition toward anything that addresses veteran care is going to be," she paused, choosing the word, "motivated." "I'm aware," Olivia said. "I'd rather build it because it's the right structure than because it looks good after a federal investigation. But I'll take the motivation if it's what's available." Holloway almost smiled at that. Not quite, but almost. "Give me 72 hours, she said. She found Callum in the parking structure at 5, loading Rex into the back of a truck that had clearly seen a significant amount of operational use. He looked at her when she came through the entrance, and she saw in his face the expression of someone who is about to say something practical, and is also aware that the day has been something other than practical, and is trying to hold both things at once. "Truell is being moved to a secure location tonight," he said. "Devlin's team. He'll be in formal protective custody until the case is far enough along." "And Van?" "Same structure, different location." He closed the truck's rear door. Rex's face appeared in the side window, looking at her with the specific attention he had been giving her all day. "Kira and I are going back to the city tomorrow, debriefing with the federal team, then—" He paused. "Then whatever comes next." "Callum," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for this morning. for following Rex's choice. He looked at her directly. Thank you for not making me talk you into letting us help. She thought about the exact moment in the neuro ward alcove when she had told him he didn't need to involve himself, and what it had cost her to say it, and what it would have cost her if he had agreed. I was this close, she said. He smiled at that. A real one. The kind that reaches the eyes. The kind you can't calculate. I know, he said. I watched you decide. Rex made a sound from inside the truck. She turned to the window and he pressed his nose against the glass, and she put her hand against it from the outside and felt the warmth of him through the barrier. He was in the program, she said, and he still chose to help people. Yes, Callum said. That's not nothing. No, Callum said. It's the whole thing, actually. She thought about what it means to be shaped by something that tried to make you into an instrument, to have your neurological profile modified, your record altered, your capacity for independent judgment treated as a malfunction to be corrected, and to emerge from it still capable of choosing your own side. She thought about the 17 witnesses who had lived with what was done to them and still, when someone finally found them, said, yes, I'll speak. I'll go on record. I'll say what happened to me in a room full of people with the authority to finally do something about it. She thought about Sarah Van, 3 years in the dark, building something precise. She thought about herself. 7 months of supply inventory and being told to stay out of the way. 17 months before that of being told she was unstable. And underneath all of it, steady and unannounced, the work of someone who had decided that the truth was worth the cost of carrying it until it could be placed in the right hands. The thing about being dismissed, she had learned, not as a lesson, not cleanly, but the way you learn things that cost you, is that it requires a daily decision. Every day you are told you are less than what you know yourself to be is a day you have to decide whether to accept that accounting or maintain your own. The decision is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It happens in supply rooms and on maintenance corridors and in wheelchairs in hospital lobbies and at workstations with borrowed credentials in rooms where the lighting isn't good. It happens quietly, and the people who make it, the ones who maintain their own accounting in the face of every institutional pressure to accept someone else's, don't always get to see the morning when it matters. Some of them don't make it there. She knew that. The ones who did weren't braver than the ones who didn't. They were not more deserving. They were just the ones who got there. She intended to use that. The program she was going to build at Harlow General was not going to be about her. It was going to be about the gap she had identified, the space where veteran patients with complicated profiles fell through because the system wasn't designed for them. It was going to be built carefully, with the 17 witnesses in mind, with the specific knowledge of what happens when medical systems treat human beings as datasets and call it research. It was going to be imperfect. She was going to make mistakes. The board was going to be difficult, and the resources were going to be insufficient, and the patients were going to arrive with histories that were not simple, and needs that were not simple, and outcomes that were not clean. She was ready for that. She had been ready for difficult and insufficient and not clean for a long time. What she was less ready for, and was still adjusting to, was the part where she was allowed to do it openly, with her own name, with her actual record, in a building where people now knew who she was and what she had done. That part would take some getting used to. She took her hand from the truck window. Drive safe, she said to Callum. Call me when the board approves it, he said. She looked at him. 72 hours. I'll be waiting. She turned and moved back toward the hospital entrance, and the evening light was coming at an angle that hit the building's glass face and turned it something other than the flat institutional gray. It was in the middle of the day, and 2 nurses coming off their shift held the entrance door for her without being asked, and she went through it. Rex was in the truck. She would not see him tomorrow. She was going to miss that dog with a specificity that surprised her, which was itself information about what the day had cost, and given in roughly equal measure. She went back inside. There was work to do, not the quiet, invisible, careful not to be seen kind. The other kind. The kind she'd been trained for, the kind she was built for, the kind that requires you to walk into a room and take up exactly the space the work demands, and not 1 inch less. The doors closed behind her. The building held its pas shape around her, familiar and changed, and she moved through it with the quality of someone who has arrived, not at an ending, not at the clean resolution that stories are supposed to provide, but at the first morning of something that finally has her real name on it. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.